I'm Aryeh Schwartz, along with my co-host, Rachel Galligan, and welcome to the Winsidr show, where it's all about the W. Today, we are sitting down with head coach of the Atlanta Dream, Nicki Collen. We're chatting with Atlanta Dream head coach Nicki Collen, breaking down their offseason, all the crazy moves they've made, how they have rebuilt this roster, looking at the draft, and much, much more. Check it out. Very excited to start our show with Coach Nicki, head coach of the Atlanta Dream. Coach, obviously the hot topic right now is the coronavirus. So if you don't mind, why don't you kind of break down your thoughts and process of, the possibility of the season or just everything regarding that in a general term?
Yeah, I think, it like everybody else, you start off wondering if we're overreacting to everything, and at the same time understanding, the health, safety, wellness of, not just our players or our league, but quite frankly, the worldwide population and how important maybe this is. It definitely makes you reflect. And, for us, I know the crazy time period really was when the president announced the travel ban without a lot of details, and all of a sudden thinking we needed to get our players out of their overseas countries by Friday at midnight was a little frantic last night before we realized they weren't talking about necessarily permanent U.S. residents. So while a lot of players are deciding to come back, it's a little less crazy than it was, after the address last night. So certainly disappointed. I mean, I was supposed to be flying to Boston tomorrow for the Ivy League championship. Certainly would have been at the NCAA tournament, but you do what's best for the health of humanity. I guess it boils down to that as simply as possible.
So now we're just gonna hop back into current things going on with the Dream. So sorry to kind of just jump right into the meat and potatoes of stuff, but your first year as head coach was great. You blew the league out of the water. You impressed everybody. Last year as a team obviously was disappointing. This offseason, you overhauled the roster, and I think a question, at least on my mind and possibly on some other people's minds, is kind of what changes did you decide? What changed, or what did you decide? Okay, we got to flip the script on this roster and kind of focus on something else.
Well, I think it's a lot of things, but I think it starts with lack of success, right? And wanting to feel like in 2018 we were definitely the asterisk of the league in terms of a team that had success, but had success maybe a little differently than what the analytics and trends are across college women's basketball, men's basketball, the NBA, in terms of threes and all the analytics. And so I think, we did it a different way in 2018, but I think in 2019, it was obviously our Achilles heel was putting the ball in the basket, and not just from three, but inside 6 feet. So I think we tried to change our roster based on those needs, the ability to shoot the three, the ability to finish inside 6 feet, and so a lot of the moves we made were very, very calculated. We certainly had, a wish list and goals, and for the most part, we checked off those boxes. But I think it started with, having to be a better offensive team, having to be a better three-point shooting team. I think people have thought of me as a defensive-minded coach, and I've always told people that I'm very comfortable on the defensive side of the ball because I've been a defensive coordinator in my career, but ultimately I was given that task and wanted to be good at it because it was the job given to me. As a head coach, I want to be good all the way around. And I think in 2018, what was underappreciated was really how good we were offensively in the second half of the season when we were 15-2. We got to good shots, we made them, and we kept moving up the offensive efficiency charts in the league. We just were so abysmal the first half that our numbers still hovered in the middle to bottom half of the league offensively. So, You know, our most of our moves were about toughness and they were about offense.
So, Coach, you talked about, your kind of your goals this offseason and that you feel like you checked off most of those boxes. And this question might be a little bit repetitive, but I'm just trying to kind of clarify, correct me if I'm wrong. So you looked at this team and your vision was, we've got to get better putting the ball in the basket. We all talk about you and your defensive mind and your rebounding ability with your teams and those types of things. Do you see that still continuing to be a staple with this specific team moving forward?
Well, I think what we did was, certainly not every player we signed, we looked at through a defensive lens, but we still analyzed them defensively. And I think sometimes the numbers, analytical defensive numbers, are very skewed to me. If you take a player that has good defensive numbers when it comes to synergy or other things, and you really have to pay attention to the eye test because is that player defending? Who are they defending? Are they defending the other team's best offensive player or worst offensive player? Are you hiding them? Are you allowing them to switch screens because they can't get through a screen? And so, I'm always going to have a defensive lens when I'm looking at personnel and how capable they are. But yes, absolutely. We needed to be able to shoot the basketball better, quite frankly, at every position. And so, I think the overhaul happened as a result of Shekinah Strickland can really shoot the three. Glory Johnson, while not a prolific three-point shooter, can put the three in from the 4 or even the 5 spot. I believe Kalani Brown can shoot the three. So it gives us a different look from Elizabeth Williams, who's obviously going to score around the rim and has limited range. And so, Courtney Williams can shoot the three. So, kind of all the pieces we added to the puzzle were all pieces that make us a better offensive team, hopefully still very, very competitive on the defensive side of the ball. Because, no, I'm never going to want to be bad defensively. I'm never going to want to be the team that you go, okay, well, they can just outscore us. I want to beat people at all facets of the game.
Right. I mean, obviously, we would be ill-willed to have this show and have you on and not talk about one of the hot scorers in the league, in my opinion, at least in flashes, and that is Courtney Williams. That was blew the roof off of everything in terms of kind of that announcement and being able to sign her and kind of the drama involved with that. There's a lot of layers. We don't have to necessarily dive into it too much, but obviously, I personally am a huge fan of Courtney Williams. I think she's a dynamic scorer, her energy, her swag, everything she brings to the court. Talk to us about that. I mean, I know you have to be excited, but that whole process with you, is that something that, kind of fell into your lap in a certain way, or was that kind of a long drawn out process for you?
Well, I think it was a little bit of all of those things. I certainly did not go into free agency thinking that Courtney Williams was going to be with the Atlanta Dream. That was, we could have put that on a wish list, but not a realistic wish list. I think when you look around the league, what teams are capable of doing with their top players, even with the new cap. Okay, well, they're going to be able to spend here and here, but then this kid's going to, fall between the cracks because maybe a team then can't afford them, not unlike how we lost Dantas last year. Our inability to protect her, we could not match Minnesota in that situation. So, we certainly didn't think she was going to be in Atlanta. She obviously got disgruntled with negotiations with Connecticut. And so that's when, it started to play out. And while, I'm not going to go into, the bit by bit what happened or the back and forth, I think Courtney decided when she didn't feel like that was the right fit for her, that instantly she knew that Atlanta was where she wanted to be. It's close to home. Her mom has rarely seen her play in the WNBA because she doesn't like to fly. And so has basically seen her play when, she's played in Atlanta. So, I think while there was a process of disappointment for her in terms of that team and how she fit in, I think she was able to move on and be excited about the potential on and off the court in Atlanta and what she brings and the diversity she brings and how she fits this city. And, I coached Courtney for 2 years. She understands who I am, how I coach, how I communicate. And I think that makes it the transition a little easier as well.
Talk to me quickly about, I know you touched on it briefly when you were talking about your offseason goals, but adding Shekinah and Glory, I think for day-to-day fans, maybe they didn't understand why that was such a big deal. And I know, at least I'm going to speak for you, Rachel. I know Rachel and I looked at that and went, ooh, and started, kind of rubbing our hands together, getting a little excited about what you guys are up to. Talk to me about what their impact, I know, like I said, you briefly spoke on it before, but talk to me in depth about their like what they're going to bring to this team.
Yeah, it's really interesting. As you're going, we were very much in one move at a time kind of plans, and not all our plans, happen. I mean, Tiffany Mitchell took less money than other teams were offering her to sign with us, and ultimately Indiana matched, I mean, not all our moves, went exactly as planned. We were just ready to move to the next person. I mean, we identified and had Strickland at the top of our shooters list because everybody knew Atlanta needed a shooter. It's not any small mystery that we needed better 3-point shooting. But, I certainly thought she was probably at the start of free agency going to be back in Connecticut as well. But I think, as Connecticut was able to kind of hit the home run and get Duana Bonner, and Bonner instantly kind of fills that small forward role for Connecticut, I think it left Strickland in a situation where there was less money in Connecticut, where there was less of a feel for what is my role going to be there. And so, that very quickly changed, where she was a very important part of what we wanted to do. As soon as we felt like, okay, we're in position to go get her, we're in position financially to go get her, we're in position, in terms of what we need and how she fits in to really go after her. And I know that necessarily the fans or the Twitter world didn't understand what moves we were making or why they fit. But for us, it was just a piece by piece process to make us a better shooting team, to make us a more versatile team, to make us a more positionless team. And I know at points I heard comments about, oh, she's just collecting great players. But when I looked at it, it was, to me, very obvious as time went on, we weren't collecting great players, which I think we did. But it was about players that fit, a position for us. And so, Strickland, obviously someone who can shoot the basketball, but Glory, really important to us in terms of, her ability to rebound the ball, her ability to defend, her ability to handle it and get us into dribble handoffs, which are so important today, to rebound and get us in transition, and then to truly stretch to the three. And I think we can make her the best version of her and kind of get her out of some of those late shot clock, gray area, long contested twos that she was kind of forced into with how, they were forced to play in Dallas last year. And so, those moves all made sense. By that point, obviously, we knew there was potential moves in the mix where we might be giving Breland up. And so we knew Glory was someone who could kind of fill that role.
So I know, again, you've kind of touched on this before, but I'm curious to hear your take on this. Did the style of play, is that going to be changing with you guys, or is it more so that you've created a roster that fits into the style of play that you'd like to be playing?
I think it's both, but I think you hit it on the head more with the second part, in that, we played with great pace in 2018. Some of that was we got more stops. What I've wanted to do from the beginning is play with more pace, even on made baskets. And so, I think having great depth, things like that, play into pace after made baskets. But I think now with the ability to put Courtney Williams on one wing and Tiffany Hayes on the other, and to consistently get into early up situations and get in transition on the wings, the ability to play way more in that first 8 seconds of the shot clock is a big part of how we want to play. I mean, we've definitely been a team that has gotten into ball screen actions. We haven't been as efficient in ball screen actions as we want to be. But I think we've opened up our roster to play a lot of different ways, in terms of, there are times that we may play Glory as a point forward, and really put potentially our best offensive lineup on the floor. A lot of this will play out in camp, but who is gonna, whether it's starting or coming off the bench or those things, I think we have some versatility now in our roster, but the ability to really run, shoot it, score in early actions, and create great spacing. I mean, I knew when I got the job here that I had players that could attack the paint. The problem is last year we played with a dirty lane the entire season. And by that, it's a term we use. Like, we want a clean lane as much as possible. We want great spacing, but when you don't make shots, the lane shrinks. The defense is, as close to defensive three as they can get all the time with multiple bodies. And we created more uncontested shots than anybody in the league last year, and just didn't make them, So our ability to put a Strickland out on the wing does one of two things. If you commit off of her, she's going to stick you, If you don't come off of her, you got a clean lane now for Tiffany Hayes to play in, for Courtney Williams to play in. And so, everything just changes that way in terms of the dynamics. We got great shots last year. We didn't make them, but now all of a sudden we're going to make those shots easier for our players, ideally.
So you might have seen our show notes, because you perfectly segue to this next question. And I'm sorry to put you on the spot. I'm a big fan of you, so I'm sorry to do this. But how are you going to form a starting five with this roster? Because if you look at this roster, you have a lot of players who have started throughout their career and a lot of players who have the talent to start still today. So how are you going to decide?
I mean, certainly some of that plays out in training camp. I think that when you, we're in very much of a, hey, it's time to get the chip back on our shoulder and prove that you're comfortable being uncomfortable. So in my mind, nobody's walking in camp saying, like, this is my job. Like, I expect there to be, and I'm out to earn my job. And that's how it was when I took the job. I certainly signed Renee Montgomery to basically back up Layshia Clarendon. That's what I thought I was doing in free agency 2 years ago. But when camp tipped off, Renee outplayed Layshia on a daily basis to the point where she earned that starting spot and became our starting point guard. And so, some of that will play out in camp to some degree. I mean, I could sit here and pencil in and say, in my mind, is Renee our starting point guard, and you've got Courtney on one wing and Tiffany on the other, and you're bringing in Strickland off the bench with Glory and Elizabeth at the 4-5. But, I just think we have a lot of different ways to play. And, so some of it has to be, how does that organically happen? And then, is your starting lineup your best lineup? We had a problem last year, quite frankly, with awful starts. But we had a hard time with also anybody consistently stepping up enough to say, okay, Monique Billings should be starting instead of so-and-so, and so sometimes you have to organically let that happen and figure out, like, who plays the best together. And your starters are not necessarily your 5 best players. They're the players that play the best together, that are going to give you the best ability to get down and guard people early, as well as, create spacing. And so some of that will really play out. But, there's times when you're going to see a lineup of Courtney, Tiffany, and Strickland at the 1, 2, 3. And, maybe we're not outletting the ball to the same person every time. And you're going to see lineups where we have, Renee at the point, or, so, and the draft pick is going to affect, what happens for us as well, in terms of, do we draft a point guard? Are we drafting a power forward? Like, where does that fit in for us? And at 4, it's hard to say right now. We're not sitting there with the number 1 pick saying, I can tell you right now, Sabrina Ionescu is going to be my starting point guard. Like, that's not the situation we're in. So some of that all has to play out. And we're going to have, depending on, some of these leagues and their suspension in league play, and when do they restart, and when, Elizabeth Williams plays on Fenerbahce, like, when are they going to be done? And when is she going to be back? And will she be quarantined, when she returns? And, so there's so many question marks still, I think, in terms of lineups and how that'll play out.
Well, we have to kind of interrupt. I mean, you just segued it again. We just got news that the NCAA tournament, men and women's, have officially been canceled. A lot to digest there, as that obviously impacts our community very deeply, on a lot of levels. And honestly, it's hard for me to not kind of get emotional right now as I think about this, and I think about the players and everything that could have been. It's hard to believe this is real. But I have to ask you, I mean, this is such a pivotal time for you guys in terms of preparing for the draft. I know you've been able to watch a lot of these players, potential top picks, a lot this season, but you really bank on tournament time, the NCAA, March Madness, to be able to get out to some these games and watch them compete on the highest stage, especially the Final Four. And then we could even talk about, combines that will probably, I don't know, questionably be held at this point. But I guess first initial reactions, it has officially been canceled in the time that we have been recording this podcast. And I mean, what are your first thoughts on everything that just happened?
Yeah, my first thoughts are really the seniors, and not even, there were players. I mean, I know you coached in the MAC as well, and seeing, Central Michigan upset yesterday in the MAC tournament, and then another team knowing there's a shot,
Yeah.
because Central Michigan's probably going to still get in as an at-large, and, but, those goals and aspirations you have as an athlete, like it doesn't, as much as it was a few years ago for me, it doesn't feel like that long ago, and that those moments of sitting there and whether it was being a number one seed when I played at Purdue or, sitting back and hoping, we were going to get in and getting a 12 seed when I played at Marquette, those feelings. And so in a lot of ways, it's all about the athletes. It's about that culmination of their careers. And I was actually reading a tweet of a coach that I worked with at Colorado State, Reagan Peebley, who they had such a huge turnaround at TCU this year and have all these seniors and how much this was going to mean for them. I mean, you talk about like such a huge turnaround there with TCU and now, not having that opportunity to show it. I mean, I think it's just, that's the part it's sadness, and it's sadness for them. And we all know why, and we know it's probably the right decision. But as much as anything, it's sadness from a business side. I mean, absolutely. It's good to see players compete when the stakes are the highest, whether that's a conference tournament, whether it's an NCAA tournament, the cream tends to rise to the top in those situations and you see them in a different environment. I was looking forward to seeing, say, a Bella Alarie play against, more Power 5 teams and seeing potential matchups there and how that plays out. And then you have a point of comparison on her. I've seen a lot of games in person. I watch a ton of games on TV. So it's not that I'm going to have less of an opportunity than anybody else I'm drafting against. So I think we're all in the same boat in the same position. So, you do your homework, you talk to coaches, and you figure out, once things happen ahead of you, what you're going to do. But, mainly it's just, I'm sad for those players.
Absolutely. It's like I said, I'm just trying to keep it together at this point. And it's hard to get me a little bit emotional, and this is a lot. But I have to ask, we talk about your off-season moves, we talk about the draft coming up and headed into this season. Obviously a ton of talent. Obviously it's going to be an exciting draft. I'm very excited to see kind of how this shakes out and how everyone's mock drafts fare with what actually is going to happen. But what do you feel like you guys have to do in this draft? I know you can't talk about necessarily super specifics, but what do you feel like are some pieces you need?
Well, I mean, I think we've identified, for us, we've obviously with the Kalani trade, we were able to go secure, a good center, and so, we were able to kind of check that obvious need off our list. But I think, what's everybody's, it's no mystery. Most people have said, what does Atlanta still need? Most people still think we need a point guard. We need do people not believe that Maite is a rising, star? Is Renee a veteran that's more of a combo guard than a point guard? I mean, there's all these are other people's questions, not necessarily mine. But at the same time, I think there's no doubt when you look at our depth chart and where we're at, I think that the areas of, obvious need are quite frankly the areas where, there's a lot of talk at the top of the draft. It's the point guards, it's the small forwards, it's a guard with size that can play 2-3 or 3-4, because a lot of our lineups are going to have a little bit smaller wings, except, Shekinah still has great size. But when you're looking towards the draft and you're looking towards the future, having another player on the wing with size, or, an obvious point guard are things that we're taking a hard look at.
Coach, I have to ask something that has been on my mind for years, and literally just in prep for this show, I was talking to Rachel about it, and she explained a little bit to me, but I'm hoping maybe you can shed some more light. Talk to me about WNBA combines, because I literally know nothing. I think fans know nothing, if they exist, if they don't exist. Can you give us a little information on, do they exist? What are they like? Or how do they kind of differ from what we might think of, in the NFL, the NBA, and such?
Yeah, I think at one point the WNBA had kind of hosted their own combine well before my time in the league, but since then the lead has been taken, by individuals to create combines in association with the Final Four, find venues. So, over the last 3 years that I've been in the league, we've had 3 different combines, one on Friday, one Saturday, one Sunday, at the Final Four. And John McGraw runs one, Linda Hargrove runs one, and Stephanie Stanley. And I know they have partners and things, but those have been the 3 combines. Some players play in 2 of the 3, some of them only play in 1. But the WNBA coaches, because they are at the Final Four, tend to go and they tend to watch them. Now, I would say sometimes as WNBA coaches, when we walk away from those, and we think about how many of the players that are at these combines are actually going to be drafted, I think the over under most years is between 5 and 7, between 3 rounds. So maybe of those, 3 combines, there's 7 players that are drafted of the 36 players. So a lot of those players end up going and playing overseas. Some of our top players are obviously in the Final Four and can't compete in them. Some of them aren't going to compete because they aren't going to get injured and they're not sanctioned by the WNBA. I think what we're still missing, quite frankly, we're still missing like someone like really get the heights and real weights of these players, like that's the one thing I think we truly lack. I mean, it was amazing how much we were searching for that information a year ago on Megan Gustafson, and we were getting stuff like, well, she measured out bare feet in 12th grade at 6'3" or whatever, and you're thinking to yourself, really, like, do we not have these numbers? And so that's the part that I wish our game was better at, that we could get, versus, basically a LaChina Robinson calling a Big Ten game and standing next to Megan Gustafson and saying, well, if I'm this tall, then she must be that tall. Like those were the gauges, we were using on certain players. And so, I mean, that's still missing, but basically those players just show up at those combines. They may have some skill work, but basically they just play games. It's old school, make a team of 8, play against another team of 8, sub every 4 minutes type of situation.
Wow. Well, I, as always, appreciate every time you come on the show. I get educated, and I know Rachel enjoys it also. She already knows half the stuff. It's an educational experience for me, but we're very thankful for you to take time and join us. And as we always say, we believe the players of the W and its community deserve the same in-depth analysis and respect that men's sports receive on a daily basis. With that in mind, please consider joining our Patreon community to help support us in the hard work that we do. Thank you so much, Coach.
Absolutely.